This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 9, Episode 9. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network of podcasts, brought to you by KSG Armory Holsters. Today is Thursday, September 21st, 2023, as of the recording of this episode. And I am your host, Riley Bowman. And today I have with me our producer and co-host, Matthew Marister.
Glad to be back, man.
Yeah, man. Well, we are back. We're back from a pretty intense couple of days in Oklahoma City from the third annual 2023 Guardian Conference, which I had to say went off more or less without a hitch.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I'm still kind of catching up a little bit on, just my energy levels and everything, recovering from all of that. And of course, you were really on the road for 2 weekends in a row there, going to the Concealed Carry Expo in Milwaukee
Right.
the week before, and then the next week flying down to Oklahoma City and doing the conference with all of us. So
Lots of traveling.
yeah, you feeling good though?
Yeah, it's good. It was really cool. I ran into a lot of, obviously at the Guardian conference, there's a lot of Guardian Nation members, and a lot of you guys that listen to the podcasts were there and got to meet you guys and hang out and talk, and which is really cool, and which I didn't expect to see so many people at the expo that like listen to the podcast and are just either customers or just follow the content and stuff. And it was just really cool, really refreshing to talk to those guys, because in the digital, we don't really connect with people a lot, and so when we have that opportunity to actually meet people face to face, it's just really cool. So I appreciated every conversation I had with uh with you guys that came up to me. I appreciate that a lot.
Right on. Yeah, and obviously we have a topic we came here to discuss, but since we are just coming off of the Guardian conference, what was some thoughts or takeaways that you are willing to share here for listeners and viewers about the conference?
I would say this year's conference was, I think, the most well balanced as far as the offering of classes, the different types, whether um, you know, and obviously that takes a little time. This is the third year, so we're figuring out what people like and what works. And but we had just a fantastic lineup of instructors that just you know I'm not just talking about like a trauma class and a legal class. We had all that stuff. We had combatives class, and Paul Sharp was fantastic. But like even just the instruction from like the live fire classes, teaching fundamental things to instructors, top notch instructors, teaching fundamental things, teaching it a little bit differently and in a different way. And it was really good to be able to see that. And I think the students or the attendees that were there had more than enough variety. I just think it was really great, and I think we did a good job in that respect.
Yeah, I agree, and I think next year's only going to be better and get better. Uh, Looking forward to a year from now, a little less than a year now, obviously, but it'll be September 20th to the 22nd, by the way, of 2024, the fourth annual Guardian Conference, again at Oklahoma City Gun Club in Arcadia, Oklahoma. So it's just north of Oklahoma City, if you're not familiar. Uh, we're we're planning to do even more and to have even uh, a greater variety of classes, including in some disciplines that you haven't seen before at previous iterations of the Guardian Conference. So I'm really looking forward to that, folks. By the way, sign up for the 2024 Guardian Conference is already open and available. So wasn't necessarily planning on mentioning this today, but it's definitely at the forefront of our minds, having just come back from that a few days ago. But if you go to guardianconference.com, you'll see right there that tickets, you can click get tickets, and you'll see that they are available right now. And we actually already have about 60 some odd people signed up again for next year. I expect for perhaps the first time in this event's history, we're going to reach capacity of what we believe that capacity to be. We haven't actually fully determined that number because we have a great range facility that has tremendous capacity to put on a large scale training event. But as quickly as we have already sold 60 seats in the event, you may not want to wait, because it's not. I don't think it's going to be like past years where we had one person actually signed up like 2 days before the event started off, because we still had a little bit of we still had capacity. So don't wait this go around. You got a year to plan. You can get a early bird ticket price right now, especially if you're a Guardian Nation member. So check it out, guardiannation.com or guardianconference.com. Guardian Nation, of course, is where you find information on the membership as well, which a lot of our attendees of the conference are Guardian Nation members. Not that you have to be, but you get the most benefit, like being able to attend our VIP dinner during the conference and getting a at least $150 better price than the general public just by being a Guardian Nation member. So let's pivot and swing over to our topic today. We're going to talk about revolvers and other handgun options inspired by our most recent Shooter Ready Challenge dry fire video series. If you're not familiar, we've been doing for a couple of years now. You can go see all of the past Shooter Ready Challenge videos at shooterreadychallenge.com. This most recent one is called Wheel Gun Changeup, because for the first time ever with Shooter Ready Challenge, I introduced doing something entirely different with a revolver. I think everything else up to this time involved some kind of semi-automatic. And I realized that that's not going to apply to everybody. Not everybody has a revolver. Not everybody carries a revolver, whether all the time or occasionally. And not everybody cares to use or carry a revolver as a defensive weapon, and that's fine. In which case, I said, hey, for this month, just this is all about challenging you in different ways. If you're normally training with and using and shooting with a semi-automatic pistol, switching over and doing some dry fire practice this month with your revolver is going to change things up. It's going to add another level of challenge to your dry fire routine, and that's not a bad thing. And for those of you that, again, don't have or don't care to do anything with a revolver, then change it up from what you normally do. So if you are normally doing your dry practice work with, your carry piece, and maybe like, let's say your carry gun is a P365 XL, a great choice, or a Glock 48, another great choice. Well, maybe this month, maybe you've got the Walther PDP sitting in the safe. Pick it up, do some dry practice with it, switch it up. I feel like, and I don't know, I'm definitely open to hearing your opinion, Matthew. While I don't necessarily advocate switching up the gun you carry on a regular basis, having a summer gun and a winter gun, or a fall gun and a spring gun, or, that kind of thing. There are times and places where there's a purpose to switch things up. While a J-frame sized revolver is not my usual carry, there's a time and place where it is what I carry. I mean, it's the exception rather than the rule by a wide margin. But every once in a while, it's like, that's the gun of choice for this particular context, and therefore, should I be doing practice with it? Absolutely. So
Mhm.
grab something different than you're usually using and that you're used to. And if you got a revolver, grab that and do some dry practice with that this month. That's kind of where we're at with this one, this go around.
Yeah, I actually, I'm glad you touched on that, because I was actually, when I first started watching the video, I'm like, okay, he's using a revolver. It's different. It's the first time probably in like 3 years we've been doing this. You use a revolver, but I was like, in I'm in Ohio, so it's starting to get a little chilly, and I start thinking I'm content writer, and I'm like, what, so I'm thinking maybe revisit like the whole idea of carrying a winter gun and a summer gun and this and that. I'm of the same mindset as you. I, I don't think I don't think that we should not carry different guns because like all of a sudden you're going to try to do a magazine change with your revolver because you're that I don't think that's necessarily the reason. um I do think that there is actually this is an interesting thing that happened at the conference. I was talking to Brian, who he I'm not going to say his last name, but he listens to the podcast, and he was at the conference. He's a good shooter. He's shooting,
So,
and
so Brian, one of the attendees, not Brian, one of our two instructors that had the name
right,
Brian.
right, right, right. He was an attendee.
Gotcha,
Yes,
gotcha, gotcha.
attendee.
Okay.
And he was shooting, and I've known him for a little while. He took classes a couple of years ago, and anyways, he's shooting really well, and he's in a precision class, and he's shooting really well. And he goes, you know what, man? He goes, I injured my hand or my shoulder, or his forearm, something. Yeah, his forearm, and he was shooting a revolver for the past like couple months or something, and he was shooting his Glock. I think he had a Glock
Hmm.
at the conference, and he's like, man, he's like, I think working on that trigger press with my revolver really helped me with my trigger press now. And absolutely, and so I think one of the maybe benefits of switching up your gun, going to a revolver type in this type of thing is when you do go back to a really light trigger, you feel that break a little bit more. Maybe it's you feel it a little bit differently than you did before. So I don't know. That was something that stood out and kind of serendipitous how you put it. You use a revolver in this week.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. When I first, I've owned a revolver at least in some fashion for a good number of years. I think I bought my first one, man, probably close to 15 years ago now. And when I first got it, I thought it was going to be a carry gun. And that was until I shot it and I was like, ooh, number one, shooting it wasn't particularly fun. Number two, I wasn't that good with it. And that's like a downward spiral because if you're not, if it's not comfortable, and by that I mean I'm not talking about like how the grip feels in your hand or fits your hand even. I'm talking about, with these smaller lightweight revolvers, especially shooting full power loads is not comfortable. It
Hmm.
stings the hand. It's pretty snappy at times. It wasn't until just a few years ago I got a little bit wiser and understood that the really, in tune guys that really uh, practice the art of shooting and carrying a revolver, they rarely are shooting full power loads, even for defensive loads out of those. Like to give you an idea, probably the round to carry for defensive purposes in a revolver, like a J frame 5 shot Smith and Wesson or the equivalent, uh, you know, Ruger or whatever revolver, say the Ruger, what is it, the SP 101, which is kind of about the same size, right? Uh, is a basically a 148 grain wad cutter. Okay. And Mark Fricky, who's a friend and a really good friend and buddy of Brian Eastridge, who has been on the podcast and who hosts the On Duty Off Duty podcast, and he's also friends with Chuck Haggard, who taught at our conference as well, and a number of other, um, you know, well clued in fellows in this arena. Mark Fricky's done a whole bunch of studying of ballistics using revolvers, and basically what he's, I mean, what the result of all that is if you're using a 38 special revolver, carrying it, like just use 148 grain wad cutters, which is like That's like your classic 38 special load. That's what guys shooting PPC with revolvers would typically shoot. And so it's not a very high powered round. It's a lot more comfortable to shoot. It's very accurate. And while you don't get a lot of expansion out of those bullets, it does what it needs to do.
Mhm.
And a lot of dudes have been laid to rest 6 feet under with 5-shot revolvers and 148 grain wad cutters. So when I figured that out and started shooting those loads instead of like your usual full power 38 special loads, especially, a lot of your defensive loads that are marketed these days are 38 special plus P. Ouch. Those are not pleasant to shoot. So anyway, point is, I've had a revolver for a while and it's been an evolution for me. And like I said, I didn't practice with it much because it wasn't very fun to practice with. And if it's not fun to practice with, meaning it hurts you, then you're not going to do it and you're not going to get very good. And when I finally got a little more serious about it and started doing it, then much like Brian that you were sharing the story of from our conference, yeah, it absolutely benefits this guy pressing that trigger. I've been advocating that for a while now, and what I mean by that is like I've got my P365 X macro. It's the slides removed, so I've just got a trigger and a frame here essentially. But every time I fire a gun, I pretty much do a complete full trigger stroke. I'm not just firing around and then only coming off to the reset point and then firing another one and only coming off to the reset point. Press the trigger, I come off the trigger. I press the trigger, I come off the trigger. I mean, there's times if you watch me in slow motion, you'll probably see that I more or less maintain contact. But there's also times that I've got video and photographic evidence of it where I'm like, you just see that finger just rowing to the trigger and coming all the way off and rowing back through it again. And here's what I like about that approach to trigger pressing is it makes you immune to other guns and their triggers.
Mm.
And so it's basically one trigger stroke for all guns, whether it's a double action only gun, a DASA gun, some kind of striker fired gun, another striker fired gun that has a reset point in a different location or different take up or whatever. Doesn't matter to me. Like put the gun in my hand, whack, 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 whack. I'm going to press all the way through that trigger. And that it not only it works and I have good trigger mechanics, but I learned a lot of that from doing work on double action triggers like a revolver trigger.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because you get, if you're trying to follow along and, a double action trigger, that revolver trigger, it's got a longer travel. And so if you're not letting it out all the way, what ends up happening is if you're used to shooting a gun with a short reset, and then you go to something with a longer reset, you don't let the trigger all the way out to reset. You go and you try to press that trigger again, nothing happens. So if you switch up your gun and you're going to run through this Shure challenge and you see yourself doing that, you're going to a gun with a longer trigger, and you see yourself doing that. That's because you're used to that short reset and getting right back on the trigger. And I'm glad you explained that, because coming up, letting it all the way out and then some, even like what you're saying, makes you immune to short stroking the trigger like that. And that's a good point.
Before we move too far along here, I need to mention that one of our sponsors of this episode today, as well as a sponsor of ShooterReadyChallenge.com, is LaserApp.com, LASRAPP.com. Laser App, the makers of the laser shot, well, it's the laser activated shot reporter software. Most recently, they have the Laser X version of that, which is what I prefer to use, what I recommend you consider using, because you can run it on your tablet, phone, computer, as long as you got an internet browser, internet connection, and a camera of some sort. Then you can set up Laser X in a matter of minutes and be up and running with dry practice that also provides you the benefit of measuring and gathering data, which is helpful in helping you actually improve. If you don't measure your performance, it's hard to get better. So Laser X will help you measure your hits on target, but arguably in some cases, more importantly, how much time it takes to do that, which has been always the hardest thing to measure in dry fire practice. Check out Laser X software and their other Laser Classic, still available as well. Both are right on their website at laserapp.com. And we thank our sponsors for sponsoring this podcast and also the Shooter Aid Challenge to make all of that possible. So, um, let's talk a bit more about just revolvers. One thing I like here is that it completely switches things up for me. So, like what I mean by that is a revolver grip is very different from the grip I use on my semi-automatic pistols. I mean, there's definitely some similarities, right? Like my primary hand grips the gun. My support hand is going to go on the other side. I'm going to try to get as much of that support hand engaged, but the grip shape, angle, all of that's very different. How the two hands interface a bit different. Where my thumbs are going to end up on the gun, bit different. So there's some pretty obvious differences between gripping a semi-automatic pistol in a revolver, and even that changes to some extent, moving from a compact revolver like a J frame to a full size revolver like a K frame or an N frame even. And so, if you're not familiar with the letter designations, just know that Smith and Wesson is, kind of that's been a thing for how they size their revolvers for many, many years. A J frame is small and compact. K frame is, again, kind of what I'd consider it to be a full size. And N frame is like the big boy stuff, especially like people are familiar with the 500 Smith& Wesson Magnum or the 460. Those are built on N frames. But so here's the other thing, and this is a bit bigger picture. And I tried to communicate this in the Shooter Aid Challenge video, is that I believe a person, if they only spend time on one specific gun, like, well, there's something we said that you'll learn that one gun really, really, really well, um, and that's a good thing, right? But you're kind of one dimensional as a shooter, and that's hey, because if I was to stick a different gun in your hand, you might struggle to shoot it, right? And you might go, well, what's the point of that? Like, I'm never going to find myself in that circumstance. I don't know. Is that true? Like, what if you were in some kind of situation and I don't know, uh, maybe for whatever reason on a particular day, you're not carrying a gun at all. And, for whatever reason, but you somehow get involved in, like, maybe you step in to assist a police officer who's getting his head smashed in. And maybe in the course of that, he hands you his gun. I don't know. I'm making stuff up here, but like it's possible, I suppose. Or maybe you're just out and about and a friend of yours, like, I mean, this has been a topic of discussion among some of my friends where it's like, hey, I got two guns on me. If I had to, I could, hand my backup gun to my spouse, my partner, my friend, because I realize they don't have one and we now have a situation to take care of, right? And so, but bigger picture than that, even still, Matthew, I feel like the bigger of like a library of understanding that we have as shooters, meaning the more stuff that we see, the more stuff we expose ourselves to, the more things we have to learn, different guns, different triggers, different grips, different whatever, how a gun points, whatever. Like, I feel like that's not a bad thing. And not everybody's going to have interest in learning new things with respect to that. But, uh, I mean, partly by choice and partly in some cases almost by necessity. Because for a long time I didn't want to get involved in Glocks. But when I was doing law enforcement work, I started to realize that there was a huge, uh, advantage to, like, if I could just switch over to carrying a Glock, my life would suddenly become so much easier.
Mhm.
because my gun of choice at the time didn't have near the number of holster options, accessory options, any number of things. Or maybe I could find a holster for that particular gun, but I couldn't find a light bearing one for it. Maybe I wanted to have a light on it. Maybe I was working, nighttime shifts more, that kind of thing. And so I was like, man, it just life would be simpler if I went to Glock, which was what at that time, especially, I think things have changed a little bit in the last, say, 5 years or so. But 10 years ago, I mean, most of the guys in my agency, most of the guys in our neighboring and sister and partner agencies, et cetera, I mean, we're carrying Glocks,
Mhm.
and there's an advantage to be said for that. Well, if something happens, this guy goes down, my gun goes down, or I run out of ammo or whatever, it's like, well, I'll just grab his mag, or I'll just grab his gun, or her gun, or what, so like, so eventually I said, all right, bite the bullet. Let's switch to Glock, right? Point is over time I've moved from SIGs, I've shot Springfields, I've shot Glocks, I've shot SIGs again, I've shot other types of SIGs. I've spent a significant amount of time. I remember when the FN 509 first came out, I shot the loaner gun I had quite a bit. And the cool thing is that now, oh, and I've spent some time with 1911s, not hugely, but spent some time. Uh, the point is now it's like stick a gun in my hand. I can get good work done with that, and that's not a bad thing. I think the more skilled you become, Matthew, the less the equipment matters. And I also think that experimenting with and trying new things and other things and different things also helps you become more skilled. So it kind of ends up going both ways.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think even from a practical aspect or point of view, like you were talking about, trying different types of firearm, single action, a DASA, revolver, like um, and a lot of people, I'm pretty convinced that like the average shooter, the average person that comes to a class who's probably never shot before or has limited experience, you put a Glock 19 in their hand, they'll probably shoot it pretty well. They shouldn't have problems running the gun, but that's not true across the board. And I think oh, if you're listening to the podcast and you're like, why do I have the gun that I have? Why do I carry the gun I carry? And why do I train with it? If the answer is that's the only gun I've ever had, or that's the gun that was given to me, or, you know, um, that might not be the best gun that you can run at this time. Like if somebody gave you a 1911, super expensive, nice 1911, and they're like, hey, you're getting into shooting, here you go. That might be a little difficult to start out with running it really well. And so I think by trying different guns, you may find something that, like, at least at my skill level right now, or this is where how I carry the gun or my lifestyle, this is really what I need. I have arthritis, so I can't rack slides or do this or that, like whatever it might be. So I think trying guns, I think what you said is totally true, and I think also it exposes you to maybe a platform or a type of gun that you didn't consider, didn't even know existed.
Matthew, how would you answer this question from Jay? Jay's a friend of ours. A longtime friend of our business and of the podcast. He says, "My fear is I have thousands of rounds out of my Glock, and muscle memory has set on that specific weapon system. My fear is I have the 5-shot revolver, which he mentioned in another comment that he carries from time to time, and if I have to use deadly force, it could be bad for me." How would you address that?
Okay, so I'm not going to go down the road of like the muscles don't have memory, it's myelination, all that. Like I get what you're talking about, Jay, and I think Jay he's an instructor too, and I think that he probably knows a lot about instruction and shooting and stuff. I would say, Jay, that like my perspective on it is certainly if you train with a certain platform, you're going to know that platform very well. But I believe if you train with another platform, if you train with the revolver, switching over isn't that big. It's not going to be that big of a deal. Like I said earlier, like I don't particularly believe that you'll default to the Glock because you spent more time. I think it's a matter of recency of training. So like if you've only trained with the Glock for, 10 years, and then you carry the revolver one day, the first day, and that's when you get in the shooting, you probably default back to that. However, if you've trained with a Glock for 10 years and say you start carrying a revolver and you're training and you're starting to train and then you get into a shooting, I think that you'll probably be able to perform in the same level. So I think it's somewhat recency of that training that you receive. So I would say train with both firearms. So you have, um, you know, I don't want to use the word muscle memory, but you have that fresh cycle of operation, or manual of arms, that fresh in your mind. That's kind of where I would go with that.
Mhm, mhm. I I couldn't have said it better. I think you kind of actually hit on all the same things I would have hit on. I was gonna say that it's about training and especially practice, Jay. He says that sometimes he carries the revolver, but his fear is that due to his familiarity with being biased towards Glock pistols, that if he had to use that revolver, it may not go well because it basically what that tells me is, Jay, you need more practice with the revolver, bro. And I've commented on this a little bit before, Matthew, where having familiarized myself to a pretty substantive degree with both Glocks, and especially in the last few years, P320s, 6 hour P320s, which many know that's my competition pistol of choice, and I've also carried 320s and shot them a bunch. These days, more or less, I'm carrying a 365X macro, which I really, really like, and I shoot fantastically well. I think it's really, really hard to beat for a gun that's compact enough for me to carry and conceal well, but still get dang near full size performance out of in terms of how I shoot it. Um, but what's curious is, Jay, is, for years I had Glock experience and shot Glocks a bunch, and I put thousands and thousands of rounds through my Glocks. So much like you, and I developed that, certain level of automaticity with how those Glocks perform for me. And then I started shifting over to the P320. Ooh, excuse me. And that kind of and then when I switched over, man, I went all in on the 320. And for a while there, didn't even touch Glocks for a long time. And what was curious to me is when every once in a while, when I would come back to and do something with a Glock or whatever, I was impressed by how quickly that came back. Um, and even now, it, it's funny. Like I'm convinced that as soon as my hand is placed on a Glock pistol, that familiarity, like how that feels, that shape of that grip, the grip texture, etc., the way that like it sends a signal to my brain. I think my brain is like, this is a Glock, bro. Like you know what to do with it. The grip angle is a little bit different, and I demonstrated this in one of my classes in Oklahoma City last weekend when a student of mine wanted me to demonstrate something with his pistol, which happened to be a Glock 19. And I was like, yeah, sure, cool, no problem. He hands me his Glock 19. I do the thing. And keep in mind that part of the reason why he wanted that demo was he was like, I'm not sure if this is the gun or if it's me. He's like, I kind of feel like the trigger is hard to work with, and stuff like that. And I was like, well, I'll give you an opinion on that. Because number one, he wasn't sure if it was like sight properly, if it was hitting point of aim, point of impact kind of thing. And he wasn't sure if there was something, like the trigger and stuff. So I just, yeah, here you go. Bam, 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 bam. And he's like, well, clearly it's not the gun kind of thing. And it's just funny because I put that gun in my hand and it felt like, way sort of like going home. It's like, yeah, I know what that is. That's a Glock. It's been years, but I've got thousands of rounds for that thing. So what that tells me, Jay, is that anything can be learned. You know, going from the first gun I seriously used and carried was a Springfield XDM, and then I went to a Sig SP 2022. Those two guns very very different, different trigger actions, everything, grips, everything, very very different guns. Then I went to a Glock 17 and Glock 19, 17 for duty, 19 for carry, occasionally a Glock 43, and then I went through a P320 and then P365, through P365 XL, P365 X Macro, which by the way has a little bit. I mean, it's actually got quite a bit different grip than even a standard P365 or the XL. All these guns are different, and I've put in the time and the practice and the training with each of those. And when I pick them up, it's like I know what that is. So, all that to say, Jay, I think I think we can learn anything that we want to learn and that we dedicate the time to. It's just a question of if we have that time to dedicate. And all we're suggesting in this month's Shoot Array challenge of doing some dry practice with revolvers or something totally different than what your norm is just to it's just to change things up, expose you to something different, and to put in some practice on something else that maybe you do occasionally carry. It's a good excuse to actually now approach it from a serious perspective and say, this month I'm going to focus on some dry practice with that revolver of mine. So that's all it is.
So Riley, as you were talking, I thought of something, and I haven't really formulated this or studied it, and maybe you have, but in specifically talking about like training on one platform and then switching over to another, I agree. I think what you said is spot on. I wonder if there's a difference between changing, say, from a Sig to a Glock and changing from something. They're similar, right? Um, Maybe changing from something a semi-automatic without a manual safety or a decocker and one that has one, and then changing from something like a semi-automatic to something completely different like a revolver that is noticeably different, like point of, the way it points in your hand, the way it feels in your hand. I almost wonder if something being somewhat more different, um, I'm just guessing, might allow you to um, not have crossover as far as um, making a mistake where you're trying to put a magazine in the revolver. Whereas if it's something that's very similar but a little bit different, like this has a manual safety, this doesn't, that might be a situation where if you don't train enough sweeping that manual safety off, that you might default to not sweeping it off if that's your default. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
I'm not
Hmm.
saying that that's true. It's just in my mind as you were saying that, I wonder if there's something to that.
Well, and I think you kind of touched on part of the key earlier when you talked about how recent you've been putting time in on a particular gun. I absolutely think that that's key. I think that there's both the quantity of practice we do with a particular tool, and then there's that certainly like Jay says, he's like, I have thousands of rounds through my Glocks. So that quantity of experience uh, is hugely important in terms of developing uh, automatics, automatic levels of skill with that particular gun. But the other piece is how recently you have refreshed the memory on a particular thing, and so it's been a practice of mine for quite a number. I mean, Jacob and I think have touched on this for years now, and probably you as well on the podcast. That when I'm getting ready for the day, I'm not going to say I do it every day, but there are lots of days where before I go out the door, I spend 30 seconds, a minute, and do a handful of draws with the particular gun I'm carrying that day. Um, and I think I started doing that when I heard, I don't even remember who it was now, but somebody mentioned it once, and I don't remember if it was in a podcast, an interview, a video I watched on YouTube, a book I read. I honestly don't remember, but somebody talking about, this is the last thing, in their last opportunity to, before I go out the door, like, hey, I touched this thing, and I refresh the memory of what it feels like and how it points and all of that, how to access it from the holster. And that's been a practice of mine for a long time. When I'm switching over to a different tool, a different type of gun, whatever, I think having that recent refresher is really key. And so you go over to the revolver where you're normally carrying a semi-automatic. I think it's really important to just spend a couple of minutes and do a little bit of dry practice. It doesn't have to be super, you don't have to go through the whole setup of getting your whole, getting laser X set up and all that. I'm just talking about just refreshing the memory of, okay, this is how I draw the gun. This is how I index on the gun. Like, this is what I feel. This is where my fingers, my thumb, all that goes when I grab the gun in the holster. Comes out of the holster. This is how, it's just refreshing that memory and making sure that it is recent, I think, is absolutely a factor. And that would be true as well of things where I'm going from a gun or a platform that doesn't have a manual active safety, to one that does, like a 1911. So that way you have recently in your memory a few repetitions of flicking that safety off.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I'm sorry, I keep fighting off some yawns. I don't know why.
It's all right. I'm a
Thought I got
boring
a lot of
type
sleep
dude.
last night. You're not boring at all. I'm admiring that beautiful, hair of yours
Well,
and
thank you.
beard.
My hairy guy, man. What can I say?
I'm always jealous of your hair because I have none.
I got more compliments on my hair than anything else. And I
Mhm.
hate it, but I'm doing it for my wife. So there you go.
Before some more words here from us. Today's episode sponsored by barrelblock.com. That's barrelblock with a K, BARRELBLOK.com. Barrelblock, of course, our preferred tool of choice for conducting yourself safely in dry practice, especially we're not utilizing a tool like the Laser X software combined with some kind of laser, like our laser dot trainer from Ready Up Gear. All other times I'm doing dry practice, I try to make sure I insert a barrel block into the chamber and through the barrel of my gun, indicating to me and anyone else that may be observing my dry practice, including my family. I like to reinforce that safe habit with them as well. That when they see me doing some of those quick repetitions in the morning before I go out the door, that they see my gun with a barrel block installed, doing dry practice, and being safe about it. Bear block will ensure that it's just an extra layer of safety, while we should absolutely have safe dry fire practice procedures in place as far as how we unload the gun, verify the gun's unloaded, what we do with our live ammo, so there's no chance of it getting into the gun while we do dry practice. But barrel block is that extra layer of security that I absolutely encourage every serious gun owner, user, carrier, dry practicer, have a barrel block, use it, have several, in fact. Go to barrelblock.com today to buy your barrel block and fulfill your barrel block needs. Barrelblock.com. So, um, I don't know, Matthew, we've talked about a number of things here. Um, where should we go to next for kind of the last bit of this episode today?
Well, I think the shooter ray challenge is unique, and I think it I don't know if it's the first time we've done it without like any sort of laser cartridge or cert pistol. Probably we've done it before, you would know, but I think that it shows that we do use the laser software to record shots and stuff, but like if you don't have it, if you don't have a cert gun, if you don't have a laser dot trainer, like you can absolutely and should absolutely be dry firing, and you can change up your dry fire routines to make it interesting and to add a level of thought and decision making into your dry fire, so it's not just like you're doing the working on your trigger press, but you're actually making decision making and that type of thing, seeing your sights and all that stuff. You can do that without any high tech gear. Sometimes that makes it more fun and gives you some options. But if you don't have it, don't stop dry firing, or don't use that as an excuse not to dry fire.
That's so true, and I would say as well that just because in a lot of these shooter rate challenge videos, I show myself doing various drills and exercises and things using that software. I do want people to, if they don't have the software, if they don't care to have the software, if they can't afford the software, which I think it's reasonably priced, considering all the benefits it provides. But if that's not within your budgetary constraint, if it's not within your budgetary constraints right now, um, we just want Shoot Rate Challenge to be an inspiration to you, to give you ideas, to show you best practices and techniques and whatnot. Just get out there and do dry practice. Um, it's really evident to me, Matthew, and I don't mean this to disparage any of our conference attendees at all. We certainly see all walks of life, skills, backgrounds, um, education and life experience and so forth of people coming to our conference and coming from all over the country and now even the world, as we had two of our certainly furthest traveled conference attendees were this most recent one. We had a husband and wife couple from Guatemala that came
Mhm.
all this way for the conference, which was, I mean, really phenomenal to see, and it was really cool to get to know them. They're wonderful people, just like everybody else is at the conference. Um, but it's really evident to me, Matthew, like it's distinctly apparent to me who when I'm teaching as an instructor. This is true of the conference, but it's also just true in general. Anytime I teach a class, any of my pistol intelligence classes, or if I go and teach at another training conference, like next week, we'll be in Kansas for the Active Self Protection National Conference. It's obvious who is putting in work in dry fire and who is not.
Mhm.
It really is. It is a difference maker. Um, and I know a lot of people don't do it, and that's too bad. We do some of these things. I mean, we talk about these things on the podcast. We do the Shooter Ray Challenge videos. We do a number of other content, all with the hope of inspiring people and hoping they'll get out and do more dry fire. And a lot of people don't. And I know that part of the reason is, I mean, number one, sometimes it's not the most exciting thing in the world to do. I think things like Laser X software makes it more fun and more interesting. So that's one advantage of having and using that tool. Um, but and then then sometimes it's just people are busy and they have other things in their life and they prioritize those other things, which I understand. I get it. But again, if you want to, if you truly want to up your level of skill with respect to handling, manipulating, uh, drawing, shooting, all of that, a pistol, using it in defense, using it in competition, doesn't matter. Dry fire is key, and you should be doing it. And the cool thing is, it doesn't take all that much to do. If you will put in, I'm known for saying things like 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and it's like, well, which one is it, Riley? Here's the thing: any amount of consistent dry practice you do on a regular basis, especially if it's daily, will make a difference. If you do 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, 3 minutes a day of very focused, deliberate dry fire practice every day for 30 days, especially, certainly 30 days, it might not even take that long. But if you did it every day for just 3 minutes a day for 30 days, you'd be a different shooter at the end of 30 days than at the start of it. That is a promise I will make. And you got to ask yourselves, can I do that? Am I willing to do that? Will I do that? Can I commit 3 minutes a day? I mean, I will say, I believe, like I'm a very busy person. I do dry fire almost every single day. There are exceptions for sure, because there are some days that are just crazy, crazy. But by and large, I would say, Matthew, out of a 30-day period, that 26 out of 30 days a month, I do dry practice. So 3 minutes a day, like you can find that somewhere in your schedule, more than likely you can. Actually, anybody can that wants to, right? So that's what I'd say about that is, it's very apparent who's actually putting in the work and who's not. And so then how much work do I need to actually do? Yeah. Why don't you start with 3 minutes a day and then do it consistently and see where that takes you? Chances are you'll get excited by your growth, and that'll inspire you. Well, oh, I'm having a good time and I'm enjoying seeing my growth. So next thing you know, you're doing 5 minutes. Next thing you know, you're doing 10 minutes. And maybe you're not doing half an hour every day, but maybe you're doing at least 3 to 10 minutes a day. And then occasionally you're throwing in there those 30-minute sessions, those 45-minute sessions, once a week or something. um, Guess what? You're going to really see your skill level up.
And seeing your skill level go up is in recognizing that and having that be an encouragement or an incentive to keep going, um, is absolutely true. But the only way you're really going to be able to see your skill level go up is if you have some sort of metric, to some sort of standard that you're following, right? Like, and so if all my, I'm not saying that just practicing, your draw for 3 minutes a day isn't going to make your draw better. Absolutely. But that incentive of like, man, my draw, like if I don't know that my draw to first shot went from a 3 second down to like a 1.5, well, then I might kind of feel that, oh, I feel like I'm getting faster, but I don't know that. But when I see the numbers come down, then it's like, oh man, this is working. And so this is why some, either even getting using, a shot timer with the part time or the laser X software or something that you can track metrics, will provide you some of that incentive when you see, those numbers coming down, or however.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, guess what? While you were talking just now, I was over here doing dry practice. Look at that. Bam, 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 bam. I
He's
mean,
getting better. He's getting better
seriously,
as we speak.
like sometimes, like it's, you could find these little opportunities of like, I can spend 30 seconds here and just do a whole bunch of trigger presses while I'm trying to isolate that grip. I mean, use your imagination. Hey, real quick before we start wrapping this up, our third sponsor of this episode and of Shooter Ray Challenge is dryfireproshop.com. That's your one-stop shop for all your dry fire practice needs. Finding products like cert pistols and laser dot trainers. Uh, Golly, there's all kinds of things on there. I'm having a brain fart of what there is, but there's a ton of stuff at
Snap.
dryfireproshop.com.
They have dummy
Dummy
rounds
rounds, yeah.
and yeah.
Barrel blocks you can find right there. I know we gave you earlier a specific link to the barrel block website, but you can, if you just want a simple place, it's like, hey, I need some dry fire stuff, go to dryfireproshop.com and shop today. We appreciate your support of our sponsors, Laser App, Barrel Block, dryfireproshop.com. I think as we kind of, put a bow on this one here today and package it up and send it out the door. Um, again, we started this discussion. The Shoot Raid Challenge for the month is Revolvers, doing some dry practice with that. But again, it could just be something different than what you're normally doing. Just wait till next month's Shoot Raid Challenge, which is kind of also similar in that it changes some things up, but is also different from this one. Um, just do something different this month than what you normally do. I think it's not a bad idea. I go through fits and bits and spurts, and like there's times where my dry practice is way more focused on defensive oriented, um, gun handling and manipulations and whatnot, and there's times where it's heavily focused towards the competition side. Well, guess what? I'm coming up on next week. I've got the state championship, And so this whole next week will be almost solely focused on competition. And that's a different holster, different belt, different gun than what I'm normally carrying these days on a daily basis. And you know what? I'll not only does it broaden my experience and skill level, but it also just changes it up. And that's either, I think that's a purpose that we didn't really touch on in this episode yet today. Sometimes just by mixing things up keeps it interesting because it can get to a point where dry practice gets kind of blah, you know, it's
Mhm.
like, I do the same thing every time. Um, Number one, that's one of the reasons why we do the Shredded Challenge to give you different ideas, different drills, different, ways of doing things. But number two, like sometimes just swapping up your gear, your holster, where you're carrying, where you're drawing from, the gun you're practicing with in dry practice, the purpose that you're practicing for, again, a defensive versus a competition oriented focus, just switching it up keeps it interesting. And then oftentimes, you know, I'll get through this phase where I'm primarily working on competition stuff. I'll come back to the defensive side a little bit more, and I feel fresher and I feel more interested in it and I'm paying more attention to what I'm doing, not just going through the motions so much. So I think that's one more kind of final piece of this I think is worth considering, and just doing something different this month in your dry practice.
Right on, man. Yeah, thank you for putting that together, and I thank you guys for listening, for being faithful listeners, and coming out to the shows and seeing us. If you can, if you're new to the podcast, if you can leave a review, reach out to us, with topic ideas or questions. Podcast at concealcarry.com is the email, but definitely leave a review. That helps us out. And yeah, we just appreciate you guys listening.
Yeah, great point, Matthew. We're not always super good about asking for people to do things. Leaving a review, it's appreciated. One other thing, share the podcast with a friend or family member or coworker or other like-minded individual. Um, I think as I was thinking of, just on our drive back from Oklahoma, Matthew, obviously you flew back to Ohio, but I, had a 12-hour drive, including all our stops, to just kind of ponder on some things. And I was thinking about how I'd like to refocus a little bit on growing the podcast. We appreciate all of you guys. It's, that we've been blessed to have quite a large audience on the podcast, but the growth has been a lot slower in recent times, and I'm passionate about trying to reach people and teach and inspire and uplift and provide everyone good information and education and information about the things that we do here and discuss on the podcast. And so, hey, why not ask our loyal listeners and viewers to spread the good word? So we do appreciate it if you do. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. A reminder until next time to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.